everybody, out in the garage. Today we're going to be working on the ground hauler and the snow plow for a little bit. Need to get a new lift axle bent up for the ground hauler. This one I just kind of guessed at. Actually guessed kind of close. But I'll show you how I'm going to bend up the axle and actually get it measured correctly for what I want. The snow plow, I'm hoping to get the servo for the steering and the servo for the diff locks mounted up, getting it that much closer to driving. We also need to get the transfer case mounted, so we're going to get to that here in a little bit. If you noticed, the fifth wheel plate is on the truck backwards at the moment. I'll get the camera and kind of explain that a little more here in a second, but it needs to be repositioned basically. So let me grab the camera. I'll get this zip tie cut out so I can show you kind of what we're working on first. The reason I had the fifth wheel plate on backwards a little bit ago is I need to figure out how to get it moved forward. As it sits on the kit stock, and since the Grand Hauler and the King Hauler all are the same, I don't have a globe liner, but I'd imagine it also uses this same amount of parts, or same style of parts and setup. The fifth wheel is mounted slightly behind center of the tandems for some strange reason. Most of the trucks I've ever driven, you usually at least have the fifth wheel centered between drive axles. And on trucks with either a third drive or a lift axle, you usually have the fifth wheel mounted almost on top of this drive axle or just slightly back. That way you get the weight evenly across all three axles. With it bolted in the stock position and backwards, that actually puts the fifth wheel just about, I think, where I want it for my setup I'm going to build. I took my heavy haul ramps off. I'm going to notch the frame a little bit here, print up a new end cap to hold my mud flaps. As most American trucks don't have much frame past the drive tires, they really just kind of 45 down out here far enough to hold the mud flaps, and maybe two or three lights is all on the back, reverse lamp, and a right and left turn signal, and that's pretty much it on, well, every truck I've ever driven, which I've driven a few. So I think what I'm going to do is just turn this fifth plate around, mount it on here backwards, and bolt it to the chassis just like this to get its position where I want it for the type of trailer I'm going to build. The lift axle I bent up in the vise, and I'm going to show you how I did that, as this one's a little too narrow. I'd like it to be a little wider. Not as wide as the drives, but a little wider than these inners. So that's what I'm working on the Grand Hauler today. I just had these held in place with a magnet, which actually worked out pretty good for mock-up. But here is my lift axle I bent up, which isn't super long. I need it to be a little bit wider. And then I have a tap and die set so I can cut some threads on here. And actually the bushings fit, yeah, they're a little loose, but they don't have to be perfect. So the bend is to actually clear the stock drive shaft, and with the tires mounted, it's a little above the drive shaft. But that'll allow the axle to go up and down. I'm going to connect it to a micro servo here underneath the sleeper that I have a micro RC shock on. That's going to kind of act as a little bit of force to keep the tires on the ground. It's not really meant to carry any weight, as the only micro servo my local hobby shop had is a Savox, and Savoxes are noisy if they're not, even when they're not doing anything. So there's that. What I have is about a 10.5 inch piece of 3/16 just solid solid core rod. Put a mark at half. Get it tucked into the vise. And then for this, I just 90'd it. Just like so. You probably could go a little more than 90. I might bend it up just a little bit more to give myself a little more clearance over the axle. So that's what we're left with. Then I kind of use my other guesstimate. You can kind of see how close it is. So what I think I'm going to do, get a Sharpie. I think I'm going to make my bend right about there. Keep that hopefully square. Mark that side as well. And then of course what you need to do is bend it the opposite way. Sure you're straight. Alright, apparently manhandling it's the way to go. That's what you end up with. I realize it's not even Stevens. In fact, it's not even really that straight, but then you just cinch it in the vise to get the bend out of it. And again, kind of freehand it. There we go. Again, I understand, not perfect, but I can tweak it a little bit more. Flat. Yeah, that's right where I like it. Camera battery died, so I'm not 100% where I lost you right there. There you can see the stock drive shaft. That is almost perfectly balanced. Reach across here. And clearly it is lower than the center of the stock axles, so that's good. Get my finger in frame again. Let's put you back on the tripod. Hang tight there. And we'll get these where I want them. almost even, just like that. Now you just got to get it centered over the drive shaft. I know you can't see inside the chassis very well, and I don't even think I could get a camera angle where you could see in the chassis really well. But there is at least 4 or 5 millimeters clearance between the drive shaft and this axle. Then it'll come up about, if I hit that cross member with it, that'll get them off the, I'd like to get them up to about there. So, that kind of final angle is going to be a bit of a trick. So, now the other thing you could do, come here, Will, is I have seen trucks with duals on the lift axle. It just kind of depends on how they're spec'd, what weight rating they're going for. So I've actually seen this on some really heavy haul trucks that aren't tri-drive, which the nice thing about the lift axle is when you get into tight maneuvering spaces, as the weight's going to be, you're going to be pivoting on the center axle. So the front drive and this rear drive are going to scrub when you're making real tight turns. So the point of the lift axle is to get you the added weight capacity, but then you can lift the axle when you need more maneuverability and you're not scrubbing up so many sets of tires. That's kind of their purpose. I think for my setup, on my lift axle, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually keep these tires tucked in so they're in line with the tanks and the cab. It'll put it a little narrower than the fronts, and of course, not quite centered between the dual drives. And I wanted to leave myself enough room so that I could mount the half fenders over each of these, because you don't want your lift axle kicking rocks up into the back of your sleeper cab that just chews things up. Or your headache rack if you had a headache rack. I'm not putting a headache rack on this truck because I'm not going with the flatbed. So I'm going to mark my axle, trim it down, and as I said, I have a set of tap and dies, so I'll just cut threads into these. And I'm tempted, I have a bunch of flat stock just around here. I'm tempted to figure out my angle, punch these through, so I can get my hand someplace where you can see it, and just use a single arm is all I really need. I'll weld the flat iron to the axle, get the correct angle on that hoop to clear the drive shaft through all of its movement. Then I still have some more, I have a ton of this rod. So what I think I will do then is cut another rod to width, weld it to here on each side, and then on that rod I'll put an arm out to my shock, and that'll get me my up and down movement. I'll pick you up here, spin you around. That's the width I'm thinking about. It's just right out to the outside of the tanks. Gives me a good profile. I think it'll look scale, and it'll look good just in general. So that's what's going on with the Grand Hauler. Now we're going to jump over to the snowplow to get my servos mounted up. So hang tight, and I'm going to get a little preliminary work done, and then we will jump back into it. Okay, starting off actually getting the transfer case mounted up to the truck. The other side is fully welded. This side here is just tacked. And it actually worked out pretty good, so all I needed to do was cut a thin strip of metal for a spacer, then using 22 gauge sheet metal for the actual mount. I have enough drive shaft bits and pieces. I managed to space out the front pretty well and got the transfer case low enough so that the body and everything else that I need to go around it will clear. So I'm going to finish welding this up and then grind it so it looks pretty. That's why I'm not showing you the other side. I haven't took a grinder to it yet, and it doesn't look pretty. Alright, after some grinding, some cutting, and some more drilling, one of the servos is mounted up to the chassis. The transfer case is in place, and I believe this is going to be where the motor and transmission are going to end up sitting. I should be down low enough that it'll clear the bottom of the cab. If need be, I do have plenty of room. I can slide it forward a little bit, and everything will mount up really nice. The cab itself actually sits flush on the servo, so I might put double-sided tape on this servo and then the steering servo on this side, stick the cab down right to it. The fuel tank and the battery box are going to mount, and I have to notch them out because the servo is going to have to stick out of them a little bit, but I'll screw them on one side into the short mount here, and then you pretty much, unless you're looking at it from the bottom, the servo horns are about the only thing you're going to see below the chassis. The steering, I'm not 100% sure on how I'm going to do yet. The Hercules Hobbies axle has the steering drag link on the bottom, front or rear, but then it has a ball up here that you can push and pull and turn the wheel that way. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to get a drag link from servo to here to miss the spring and have it get enough throw to do steering. So that's still something that needs to be worked on. Still a lot more work to go anyways, but at least now I can start ordering drive shafts for the truck. As soon as I get that other servo mounted, I can start finalizing the cab mounting. Then it'll be on to the dump bed. So, as always, thank you for supporting the video by watching it. Please click like if you enjoy my content, and subscribe so you can see more slow progress when I get to it. Eventually. Hope everyone's having a good weekend, and we will catch you later.